Benvenuti e bentornati su London One Radio con la nostra puntata di Il Medico Risponde. Non può mancare naturalmente un'altra puntata dedicata a cosa? Alla salute, al benessere, ma soprattutto ad una nuova ricerca che a quanto pare in Gran Bretagna ha scoperto, pensate, che ci potrebbe essere un aumento economico pari a 13,3 miliardi di sterline nel prossimo decennio se l'NHS dovesse aprire e aprirsi un po' di più all'utilizzo della cannabis medica. Con noi Simon Elridge, Director of Research at Curaleaf Clinic. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
And Pushpin Singh, Managing Economist at the Center for Economies and Business Research. Thank you very much for being with us.
No, thank you for having us.
So I'm going to start with Pushpin first, because as I was saying to our listeners, your study suggests a potential £13.3 billion boost to the UK economy over the next decade if access to medical cannabis is expanding. So which economic sectors do you think would benefit the most from this growth?
Well, it's a good question. There's no specific sector that we had targeted in mind, actually. The boost mostly associates with bringing people with long-term health conditions like chronic pain, PTSD back into the labor market, very much aligning with the current government's policy commitment to bringing people back into work. Now, it was very hard to kind of disaggregate which sectors these people would tend to work in. So we would frame it as more of an economic boost rather than a specific sectoral boost. But what it does entail is the huge boost to public finances, indirect effects in terms of consumer expenditure, in terms of higher productivity, etc.
Perfetto, come ha detto Pushpin, in realtà non c'è un settore specifico che beneficerà di questo aumento di economico nel caso l'NHS dovesse veramente aprirsi all'utilizzo della cannabis medica. But I'm very interested in understanding the medical condition treated at Curaleaf Clinic that show the most significant benefits from medical cannabis, Simon.
Yes, so the most common conditions where medical cannabis is prescribed in the UK is for chronic pain. Around about 50% of individuals are prescribed medical cannabis for chronic pain.
Okay.
The next most common conditions are psychiatric mental health conditions such as anxiety, PTSD, depression, and then other conditions that people may be more familiar with, but they're just much less common in society, are things such as epilepsy or multiple sclerosis.
Why? But do you think the NHS? Why do you think the NHS is not as much open to introduce more medical cannabis? Is a problem of the cost, or there is another reason behind it?
I think it's likely multifactorial. One is going to be related to cost, the way in which the NHS makes decisions around the costs of medicines, for example. Doesn't fully take into account the economic benefits that has been shown in this report. It purely looks at the cost of the medications themselves and how they relate to the outcomes of patients. But also, in addition to that, the time in which NICE, which is the body that decides on the funding of medications in the UK, conducted their evaluation as to whether it should be more widely available on the NHS, is now started to become quite outdated. So there would be some rationale for re-updating that analysis to see whether it would meet the thresholds anyway, without all of these supplementary benefits that we've been able to show within the context of this report.
And of course, because as you telling us, is quite beneficial in terms of health for a lot of patients, it means that many patients then can go back to work. So I'm going back to Pushpin to understand how many people could realistically return to work if medical cannabis access were widened, and what economic barriers might slow this process, do you think, Pushpin?
That's a good question, actually. I believe we had a figure just under 100,000 in terms of people getting back to work. Obviously, those figures can change. It's a temporal figure. It changes over time depending on the uptake of medical cannabis and obviously the kind of processes of onboarding people onto medical cannabis as well, which I believe Curative Clinic can speak better to, and Simon can speak better to as well, in terms of the application processes. I didn't really catch the second point. Could you repeat that again, please?
Yeah, I mean, if you, what are the barriers, the bureaucratic economic barriers that might slow this process? I mean, this suggestion that you're making, like making medical cannabis more available.
I think Simon is much more well placed to answer in terms of barriers there. But I think a quick one for me is basically kind of firstly on stigma, which again Simon can address a lot more better than I can. But these are things in terms of kind of bureaucratic processes take a bit more time. But I'm happy to pass over to Simon to speak on that more.
Yeah, broadly. Simon, what do you think?
Yeah, I think although there has been a growing amount of research, there's always a need for more, and I think that the challenge is with medical cannabis in particular. We're not talking about just one specific medication. We're talking here about a class of medications, and that makes it much more difficult in order to be able to aggregate the research together to be able to come to one conclusion about this specific medication should be more widely available on the NHS for this indication. So that makes things more challenging. And because of the years of prohibition that we have had up until 2018, really, we're still playing catch up in getting the right types of research that the medical community traditionally engages with in order to be able to make decisions around funding of medications. So that is one big challenge. Another has been around stigma, as Pushpin has mentioned, and a third is around awareness. I think that there is a lack of awareness, whether it comes to the general public in and of themselves, as part of additional polling that we did within the context of this report. It still shows that despite medical cannabis being legally available since 2018, still up to 40% of people aren't aware of that fact. And so it's really nice to be able to come on a show like this and help to make people aware of their options if they are in the right circumstances to access medical cannabis.
E questo è un punto molto interessante, perché Simon ci dice che nonostante nel 2018 la cannabis ad uso medico sia stata legalizzata, c'è ancora una grande percentuale, circa oltre il 40% delle persone, che non sono consapevoli del fatto che possono utilizzarla se hanno delle malattie, delle patologie che richiedono questo utilizzo. E lo stigma, così come anche altre barriere economiche e burocratiche, potrebbero effettivamente rallentare questo processo. Ecco perché continua la ricerca e le testimonianze di moltissimi pazienti che, utilizzando la medical cannabis, si sono comunque trovate bene e hanno your patients basically. Can you please first of all let us understand who can be treated with medical cannabis, at least some examples, and secondly, the benefits of these patients, if patients who are undertaking this kind of treatment are now back to work and are benefiting from this treatment and therapy.
Of course. So access to medical cannabis really boils down to two things in the UK. One is having a condition where it's appropriate to be trialing medical cannabis for them. And secondly, the guidelines state that you should try medical cannabis after you've kind of exhausted first line therapies. So they may be ones that you access via your GP or a specialist. So let's take the first, the most common condition, chronic pain, as an example. So it would be individuals who have gone to see their doctor, they've had a diagnosis for chronic pain, they've tried maybe 2 or more pain relieving medications via their GP or via a specialist, and then they subsequently would then potentially be eligible for accessing medical cannabis. And so the way that they would go about doing that is at the moment, unfortunately, NHS access being limited as it is, going to a private clinic such as Curaleaf to be able to determine whether they are eligible for medical cannabis and then continue their ongoing care. In terms of how it may affect people, in terms of helping them get back to work, what's really clear around medical cannabis is that in all of the indications where it's being used, it's not what we call a disease modifying medication, in that it doesn't change the severity of the condition. More so, it is a symptomatic medication in such that it's trying to reduce the amounts of pain, psychiatric symptoms. In the context of neurology, maybe it's seizures or spasticity or whatever it may be. It doesn't, change the ultimate underlying
it doesn't erase
condition.
the pain. You meaning that it doesn't erase the pain, but it reduces the pain. So it means that they need to use medical cannabis for how long? Actually, for a long period of time.
I wouldn't quite put it like that. An example would be someone who had arthritis, for example. Medical cannabis doesn't take away their arthritis, but it's there to help with the pain, and therefore they're able to, move around more easily and do their normal daily activities and go to work, even though they still have that arthritis, if that makes sense.
Right. And have you seen any side effects?
Yeah, so like any medication, we always have to be wary about the risks as well as the potential benefits. We see from data from the UK Medical Cannabis Registry, about 1 in 5 individuals reports side effects during the course of their treatment. The most common of these are dry mouth, sleepiness, increased fatigue. Some individuals also report headaches. Thankfully, for the vast majority of people, these can be self-limiting. And what we do also to help reduce the incidence of these is we start at a low dose of medical cannabis and increase this over time slowly. And we find that is better able to reduce the likelihood of someone experiencing any side effects from medical cannabis, although it doesn't completely remove the risk, of course.
Right, allora abbiamo chiesto a Simon, vi faccio un briefing molto veloce perché vorrei poi passare con Pushpin about other economic facts out of this research they all made. So quello che ha detto è che la medical cannabis in questo momento è legale naturalmente. Cosa fa? Va a ridurre il dolore. Il dolore quale? Quale dolore? Il dolore cronico, perché abbiamo visto che dopo una serie di cure che alcuni pazienti particolari hanno dovuto seguire, non è servito a nulla e quindi hanno fatto ricorso alla medical cannabis e hanno notato un miglioramento nella loro vita quotidiana. Ora, quali potrebbero essere i side effects? Quindi gli effetti collaterali ne sono diversi, come ad esempio non riuscire ad essere sempre sveglio, nel senso si ha questo senso di affaticamento, si dorme più spesso, e questo capita su una persona su 5 pazienti che fanno uso di medical cannabis. Cosa hanno notato? Che somministrando piccole dosi di medical cannabis durante il trattamento e la vanno poi ad aumentare pian piano, ecco, questi effetti collaterali iniziano a diminuire. Going back instead to Pushpin, I would like to understand with you if this widening the access to medical cannabis, do you think that could help the NHS to reduce the cost? And in which way?
In terms of that, the whole idea of this report and the research that we've done, the whole idea is not to kind of phrase medical cannabis as this be-all and cure-all or the silver bullet that can be the ultimate solution to solving kind of NHS waiting lists, hospitalization lists. It's to kind of add another element of nuance and another option for treatment, which has previously been inaccessible given the rich evidence base surrounding medical cannabis. Obviously, our report finds significant kind of impacts in terms of reducing hospitalizations by 28%. We didn't directly cover waiting lists, but obviously there will be a knock-on effect in terms of letting more people who have otherwise been untreated get treatment in the scenario whereby medical cannabis is made widely available. So yes, there are a lot of spillover effects. We haven't necessarily directly quantified it, but we have definitely taken account for it as well in terms of consideration for this research.
Right. I was I was thinking about also what you said earlier, Simon, and I was thinking if medical cannabis can be not an overall solution, but can help people with fibromyalgia Is it something that is already been tested, do you think, or have you had any type of examples or patients?
Yes, fibromyalgia is a condition that we commonly see at Curaleaf Clinic, and particularly because in fibromyalgia, people do experience chronic pain symptoms, but in addition and beyond that, they are commonly affected by things such as fibro fog or mental health challenges. And so what we really see is actually in individuals with chronic pain of any type who are also affected by comorbidities such as anxiety, catastrophization, sleep disruption, that there can be sort of supplementary effects from the effects of medical cannabis on those, in addition to its effects on chronic pain itself.
Right, questo è anche molto interessante, che hanno notato che potrebbe essere utile anche per i pazienti che hanno fibromialgia, che qui è anche molto diffusa in Gran Bretagna. Abbiamo chiesto invece prima a Pushpin se questo accesso un po' più avanzato nei confronti della medical cannabis possa effettivamente aiutare l'NHS in termini economici. Lui ha detto di sì, potrebbe anche aiutare a ridurre le famose waiting list che continuano a rendere il sistema sanitario nazionale poco efficiente. Voi lo sapete benissimo per chi abita in Regno Unito, purtroppo, sotto questo punto di vista, e per riportare al lavoro tutte queste persone che hanno dei dolori cronici, e quindi sarebbero per un numero di sotto i 100.000 cittadini che potrebbero tornare al lavoro se utilizzano questo farmaco, che naturalmente non è la soluzione a tutto, però potrebbe aiutare l'NHS. So finally, I would like to understand, how did you come up with this idea, this research, Pushpin?
Well, we were actually commissioned by Curaleaf Clinic because they obviously are the experts in medical cannabis. So I think this inspiration really came from Simon as well, and Simon and the Curaleaf Clinic team. I think given their long-standing expertise and also their functions in that space, we lies with them, and also they commissioned us to make this produce this research.
And we would be very interested, Simon, in understanding much more even in the future. So you both are very welcome next time to understand better these analysis. And let's see if the NHS will welcome your proposal and understand your research. Thank you very much for being with us on London One Radio.
Thank you